my name is Sierra Nelson, and this is Racism in Education in Oakland Schools. Racism in education remains a prevalent global issue. However, its effects have become very evident in predominantly Black communities, as seen through the experiences of Black-led organizations like the Oakland Education Association in Oakland, California. The following digital media will explore the topic of racism with a focus on racism in education in Oakland. More specifically, how prevalent racism is and its influence on the Oakland educational system and organizations such as the Oakland Education Association, Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach. Racism in education has historically largely affected Black communities and organizations such as the Oakland Education Association, Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach. As demonstrated in my first resource for my research on racism and racism in education, which is titled Contracting Race, Writing Racism and Education, this reading relates to my stakeholders, as they are activists for Black students having access to equal education, specifically in Oakland, California. This first resource, written by Zeus Leonardo, supports my research on racism and racism in education because it discusses the educational disadvantages placed on people of color through the creation of a power structure that has been formed and reinforced politically while socially by white people. Leonardo argues that society has been set up in a way in which white people are seen to be superior and have created a system in which they are placed on a pedestal above others. This can be seen on page 2 of Leonardo's article. This system not only benefits white people, but was set up by white people for reasons of personal gain, such as having the opportunity for a better education. The disregard for predominantly Black districts can range from a lack of experienced teachers to access to equal educational resources, such as up-to-date textbooks or access to computers. The unequal distribution of funding and resources creates a large learning gap between white and Black students, thus reinforcing the stereotype that Black people are less educated or knowledgeable in the real world. The Oakland Education Association would find interest in Leonardo's argument, as the OEA fights for educational equality. They work to diminish current power structures that have allowed predominantly Black school districts, such as in Oakland, to be underfunded and privatized to support rich white students. The second resource, Studying and Challenging Racism in Higher Education, Naming Bad Faith to Understand the Logic of Racism, written by Antar A. Ticha Vakunda, discusses the idea of bad faith and the role it has played in the lack of racial justice in higher education, directly relating to the Oakland Education Association, Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach, as well as similar anti-racism groups, as all four of these groups fight to enact racial justice in the Oakland School District, thus demonstrating good faith by bringing attention to such issues. This second resource, published by Antar A. Ticha Vakunda on September 21st, 2021, supports my research on racism and racism in education, as it discusses the relationship between the concept of bad faith and the lack of racial justice in higher education. Ticha Vakunda introduces this idea of bad faith in relation to racism, which can be explained as the act of ignoring or refusing to challenge acts of racism. He provides readers with multiple court cases of brutality against people of color, one of which, a Black student at Bowie State University, was murdered by a white man. The man was proved to be a member of and encouraged hate groups on social media. This man was found guilty of murder, but not of a hate crime. The normalization of such heinous acts, again, shines light on Ticha Vakunda's idea of bad faith, in which people choose to ignore racial behavior. racist behavior. In this case, ignoring Colin's history of a hateful social media presence and writing his action of murdering a black man off as not being related to such behavior, he wrote about another specific example in which a young black man attending San Jose State University was physically and verbally harassed by his 3 white roommates. The juries and judges of both cases chose to ignore the blatant evidence that race was the motivating factor behind both crimes, proving Ticha Vacunda's concept of bad faith to hold validity. In both cases, 2 young men's lives were disrupted, one of which was brutally ended, while trying to pave the way for their futures by gaining a college education. The specific stakeholders discussed by Ticha Vacunda are the families of the victims who faced racism while attending school, as well as those involved in the court hearing of each case and demonstrated bad faith. The Oakland Education Association's purpose of creating equity in education is a good demonstration of fighting against bad faith, as well as Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach, for they're all working to better the lives and educations of Black students in Oakland, demonstrating the opposite of bad faith as they bring attention to the issue of racism in education, rather than ignoring it. Leaders of education, such as the Oakland Education Association, Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach, and their understanding of race science defines race science for many future generations, as demonstrated in my 3rd resource for my research on racism and racism in education, titled Educators Confront the Science of Racism, from 1898 to 1925, written by Thomas D. Fallis. This 3rd resource discusses the way in which race has been a topic of inequality in education for generations, and how it takes time to reverse the long-lasting effects race scientists have had on it, demonstrating its relationship to the Oakland Education Association, Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach, as they are a part of the up-and-coming generations that are working to confront a system that has been built to support the education of white people while ignoring the needs of Black people. Additionally, this resource by Thomas D. Fallis, which was published October 6, 2015, supports my research on racism and education because it discusses the complex and inconsistent views on race science by many prominent figures in education and science, as well as their attempt to redefine race and science. Fallis discusses a variety of educators, many of which were psychologists, such as John Dewey and G. Stanley Hall. Hall was known to argue that biology was the main determining factor for one's characteristics, such as intelligence. However, Dewey believed environment to be the leading factor. Though Dewey and Hall were both psychologists, and in the same time period, they had very different views on whether race impacted intelligence, demonstrating inconsistencies in race science through the educational society during the mid to late 1800s. The gap in opinions during this time period led to both racist and non-racist attempts to redefine race science. This supports the work done by groups like the Education Association, Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach, as they work to prevent racist stereotypes and ideas from entering educational settings. Racism in education remains a prevalent systematic issue, as is evidently demonstrated in predominantly Black communities in Oakland, California, and participating organizations such as the Oakland Education Association, Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach. My 4th resource, Reclaiming Racial Justice and Building Solidarity in Oakland's Educational Justice Movement, directly relates to Oakland, which is my fault line, and groups similar to the previous stakeholders discussed, that are working towards creating an educational system that equally supports Black students. A main idea I found to be a correlation in all of my research is the lack of funding and prioritization of schools or districts located in predominantly Black communities. A specific stakeholder involved in the issue of school privatizations in the Oakland School District is the Oakland Education Association, also referred to as the OEA. Their specific goal in the past few years has been fighting the privatization of public schools, as it has pushed many people of color and families to find schools in different districts that have better funding and support for public schools. Additionally, many families in the Oakland Public School District are unable to afford to send their children to private schools, causing a large educational gap between Black and white students, as the public schools face a lack of funding and equal access to resources. The Oakland Education Association fights for educational equality to diminish current power structures that have allowed predominantly Black school districts, such as in Oakland, to be underfunded and privatized to support rich white students. The OEA is an Oakland-based organization that fights against racism in education and equal opportunity for Black students in Oakland. They have helped to initiate protests and rallies speaking out against the privatization of schools and emphasize impacts it has had on Oakland's Black community. The audience for the discussion of racism in education is most specifically targeted towards educators and students who want to understand how racism remains a large issue in the lives of many Black people in educational settings. For example, the Oakland Education Association targets educators, such as teachers or administrators, who want to be a part of change in the Oakland School District to better the educational opportunities for disadvantaged students and families. Though racism in education is a topic that is slowly being combated by many all around the world, a specific group that works to support Black students in the Oakland Public School District is the Californians for Justice, a youth-powered group located in Oakland and 3 other California locations, which is led by young people of color, LGBTQ+ members, and low-income students, hoping to inspire a change to public school funding to create educational equity. As a youth-led group, members of Californians for Justice have personal experiences with being disadvantaged and targeted by the lack of funding to Oakland public schools. They fight to create an education system that is equal for all students, no matter their socioeconomic status, thus benefiting those who are systematically disadvantaged, such as Black students. Many families in the Oakland Public School District are unable to afford to send their children to private schools, causing a large educational gap between Black and white students, as Oakland Public Schools face a lack of funding and equal access to resources. Additionally, this organization gives a voice to students who have personally experienced a lack of resources and support from their community. The Equity Allies for OUSD is a parent-led group of Oakland Unified District students fighting to create an educational system in which all schools are equally funded and all children have equal access to an excellent education. The Equity Allies for OUSD organization demonstrates how frustrated parents of Black children in the Oakland Unified School District have become with the lack of funding in predominantly Black schools. They are one of the most prevalent Oakland groups working to better the education of Black students and combat the global issue of racism in education by doing so for the Oakland public schools, in which the schools are predominantly Black. As parents, they have had first-hand experience with the school district and gained the interest of other parents and educators who feel that their kids or students are disadvantaged due to a lack of funding for public schools in Oakland. Their goal is to put an end to the privatization and lack of prioritization of Oakland public schools, as it causes a large educational gap between white and Black students. The Oakland Reach is a parent-led group of Oakland Unified District students fighting to create an educational system in which all schools are equally funded and all children have equal access to a good education. Thus, an educational system in which racism in education can be extinguished. Similar to Equity Allies for OUSD, the Oakland Reach is led by a group of parents of students in the Oakland Unified School District. As parents, they are fighting for their children to have equal access to a more successful education. They aim to create an equal distribution of funding to all Oakland schools to ensure each student receives an equal education and access to any resources they may require. Oakland-based organizations such as Oakland Education Association, Californians for Justice, Equity Allies for OUSD, and the Oakland Reach aim to create educational equity in the Oakland School District and fight against racism in education. This digital media project explores the topic of racism with a focus on racism in education in Oakland, California. The discussed organizations all have similar interests in breaking down a pre-established racist system in which students of color have been educationally disadvantaged and aim to create an Oakland school system that provides all kids with an equal opportunity to a fruitful education. Thank you. Here's my works cited and all credits given to my digital media resources. Thank you.